She wasn't supposed to be there. That was the first rule, the only rule that mattered. Don't cross the ridge. Don't go where the wild things are. Don't go where the Lakota walked free as the wind, on land her father swore was his. But Clara Madden was born with a heart that didn't listen to rules. It listened to the pull of the horizon, to the whisper of things she wasn't meant to know, and today, that pull had a heartbeat. He stepped out from between two ancient pines, and the world just stopped. He was tall, his chest bare and brown against the deep green of the forest. He moved with a quiet that wasn't silence, but something older, something that owned the silence. He wasn't sneaking. He was simply arriving, their eyes locked. Her breath caught in her throat, a little bird trapped in a cage of bone. His didn't. "You are far from your home," he said. His voice was low, like the rumble of distant thunder, not a threat, just a fact. "So are you," she shot back, lifting her chin, trying to hide the tremor in her hands. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It changed his entire face, softening the hard lines of a warrior into something else, something she didn't have a name for. He glanced down at the deer trail she'd been following, then back at her. "The tracks led me here," he said. "Me too," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. They stood there, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off each other's skin, but 1,000 years apart. She knew the words her father used for his people: savage, thief, heathen. But looking at the man before her, none of those words fit. He held a small, hand-carved flute, not a rifle, not a knife, a flute. "I've seen you before," she confessed, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "Down by the river, you were fishing." His dark eyes held hers. "I saw you too." A blush crept up her neck. "You never looked up." "I looked," he said, the small smile returning. "You did not see." That made her laugh, a real sudden laugh that echoed in the quiet glade. The sound of it seemed to crack the tension, letting something new and dangerous seep into the air between them. He told her his name was Tahu. She said hers, Clara, and he repeated it, slow and soft, like he was tasting the sound of it on his tongue. The world seemed to shrink until it was only the two of them, standing in a patch of sunlight, breathing the same pine-scented air. They didn't talk much more. They didn't need to. The space between them was humming, buzzing with an energy that was more powerful than words. But then a hawk cried out, a sharp, piercing shriek from high above. Tahu's gaze snapped toward the hills, and just like that, the spell was broken. The warrior was back. "You must go," he said, his voice flat. "Your people will be searching." "Will I see you again?" she asked, the question feeling heavy and desperate on her tongue. His silence was the only answer she got. She turned and forced her feet to move, to walk away, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. She could feel his eyes on her, a weight on her back every step of the way. She knew he was watching her go, and she knew, with a certainty that terrified and thrilled her, that this was not the end. It was the beginning of something that would either save her or ruin them all. That night, the air in the Madden cabin was thick with smoke and hate. Her brother, Matthew, spat tobacco juice into the fire. "Saw 3 of 'em near the south pasture today," he growled, "just watchin', like vultures." Her father, a hard man with hands like worn leather, just nodded. "We'll be ready for 'em. It's time we taught them whose land this is." Clara said nothing. She stared into the flames, but all she saw were Tahu's eyes. She didn't hear the talk of borders and rifles. She heard the memory of his voice saying her name. They were talking about a war, but the man she'd met in the woods didn't belong in a war. He belonged in her heart. She made her choice before the sun came up. Before the frost had even melted off the grass, she saddled her mare, her movements swift and silent. She didn't know what she was doing, only that she had to do it. She rode back to the ridge, not with a plan, but with an ache in her chest, a need to see him again. He was there. At the stream where they first met, he was waiting, as if he knew, as if he felt the same pull she did. He didn't say hello. He just held out the flute. She took it, her fingers brushing his. The wood was warm, inexplicably, impossibly warm. "I could not sleep," he said softly. "So I played. I thought of the girl with fire in her hair who is not afraid of the forest. No one had ever spoken to her like that, not with that quiet reverence. Her heart did a slow, painful somersault in her chest. This was dangerous. This was madness, and she didn't care. "My family," she started, her voice breaking. "They would never understand. They'd send me back east, or worse. My people would say I follow a ghost path," he said, his gaze serious. "That I am letting a pale face turn my spirit from its duty." The truth of it settled between them, cold and heavy. This couldn't work. It was impossible. Two different worlds, destined to collide. She took a step closer. The water rushed over the stones at their feet, whispering of time and endings. "Then let's meet here," she said, her voice small but steady. "In secret. Where it's just us. No one has to know." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and a slow, wondrous smile spread across his face. It was like watching the sun break through a week of storm clouds. "If we do this," he said, his voice full of a sudden, fierce conviction, "we do it in truth, for us, not as something stolen." And so it began. Their stolen moments became a secret world. They met in hidden groves and under blankets of stars. He taught her the Lakota words for sun and moon and soul. She taught him the English word for hope. He showed her how to read the stories left in the mud by deer and wolves. She told him stories from the books she read, of kings and castles and faraway lands. They never spoke of the future. They lived only in the now, in the breathless, heart-stopping moments they could steal. But a fire, no matter how well hidden, always leaves a trace. One afternoon, she came home later than usual. Her hair was messy, a wild flower tucked behind her ear, and her eyes held a light that hadn't been there before. Her brother Matthew saw it instantly. His eyes narrowed. "You've been wandering awful far, Clara," he said, his voice low and suspicious. "Don't you forget who you are, and what they are." She just smiled, a secret, infuriating smile, and walked past him. But that night, the world started to crack. Her father stood in her doorway. He wasn't yelling. He was quiet, which was so much worse. In his hand, he held her mother's locket, a small silver oval she always wore. "Where have you been going, Clara?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. Her blood ran cold. "Just writing," she said, her own voice a stranger's. He took a step into the room. "Matthew found this by the old creek, near the ridge." He held up the locket. The clasp was broken. "He said he found tracks there too, a man's, and they weren't shod with iron." Clara's heart stopped. She had lost it. She had lost it when Tahu had been teaching her a constellation, when he'd brushed her hair back from her face. Somewhere, miles away, Tahu was probably sitting by his own fire, thinking of her. And right here, in her own home, her family was getting ready to burn their secret world to the ground. She knew, looking at her father's face, that this was no longer about wandering too far. This was about to become a hunt. The next morning, the threat was no longer a question in her father's eyes. It was carved into the gate of their own ranch. No mixing. The letters were crude, dug deep into the wood with the tip of a knife. Clara felt sick. She knew who did it. It had to be Matthew. It was his rage, his hatred, made real. She didn't confront him. She didn't cry. She saddled her horse and rode. She rode like the devil was on her heels, kicking up dirt, not caring about the branches that whipped at her face. She had to warn him. She had to tell him they knew. She found him in their glade, waiting. The look on her face told him everything before she even spoke a word. "They know," she gasped, sliding off her horse. "My brother, my father, they found my locket near here. They think I am a thief," Tahu finished for her, his jaw tight. He stood up, his body radiating a sudden coiled tension. "Then we must stop meeting. It is too dangerous for you." "No," she said, the word tearing from her throat. "I won't stop. I would rather face their anger for something real than live a lie for their approval." He looked at her, his dark eyes searching her face. The anger in him seemed to soften, replaced by a deep, aching sadness. "You do not understand what they will do, Clara. To me, and to you, for being with me." "I don't care," she insisted, stepping closer. "You're not what they say you are. You're not the enemy." He reached out and gently touched her cheek. "To them I am, and now to my people, you might be too." That thought hit her like a physical blow. She had only thought of her own family's hatred. She hadn't considered that his people would see her as a threat, a danger, a white woman who could bring nothing but ruin. They stayed together until the sun was high in the sky, talking in low, urgent whispers. But the easy joy was gone. It had been replaced by a frantic, desperate edge. When he held her this time, it wasn't gentle. It was tight, possessive, like he was trying to memorize the feel of her, a goodbye that was too painful to say out loud. When she got back to the ranch, the air was poison. Matthew didn't even look at her. He was cleaning his rifle on the porch, his movements sharp and angry. Her father was gone, but he'd left his silence behind, a heavy blanket of disapproval that suffocated her. That night, she couldn't sleep. The floorboards creaked in the main room. She crept to her door and pressed her ear against the wood. It was her father's voice and another man's. Silas, from the neighboring ranch. A man known for his short temper and his long-held grudges against the Lakota. "They're getting bold," Silas was saying. "My boy saw one of 'em clear as day, not a mile from the river. We need to push 'em back, for good." "It ain't just about land anymore," her father's voice was grim. "It's about what's right." Then Matthew's voice joined in, hard as iron. "We ride at dawn, a few of us. We'll scout the ridge. If we see 'em on our side of the creek, we don't ask questions. We make a statement. A statement, with rifles." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. They weren't talking about territory. They were talking about Tahu, about his people. They were planning to kill him. She backed away from the door, her hands shaking. She had to do something. She couldn't let this happen. She waited until the house was dark and silent. Then, she slipped out the back, her feet bare on the cold, damp earth. She ran to the edge of the woods, to the big, flat rock where she and Tahu sometimes left signs for each other. With a piece of charcoal from the fire pit, she scribbled a frantic message on a piece of birch bark she tore from a fallen log. "They are coming at dawn. With guns. Don't be at the ridge. Please, be safe." She slid the bark under the stone, her prayer a silent scream into the darkness. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves. It sounded like a warning. Miles away, across the silent, sleeping land, Tahu was tending his own fire. He stared into the dancing flames, a strange coldness seeping into his bones. He didn't know why. He just knew that the world had shifted. And when love gets caught in the crossfire of war, the only question left is who will be the first to bleed. The piece of bark felt like a stone in his hand. Tahu read the words again and again, the crude charcoal letters spelling out a death warrant. They are coming at dawn, with guns. He didn't have to guess who they were. His brother, Wakasa, found him staring into the dying embers of the fire, the message clutched in his fist. Wakasa was older, his face a map of battles fought and hardships endured. He had been watching Tahu for weeks, had seen the change in him, but had not spoken of it, until now. "It is the settler girl," Wakasa said. It wasn't a question. Tahu didn't bother to deny it. He looked up at his brother, his own face bleak. "I love her." The words hung in the cold night air. Wicasa was silent for a long time. Then he sighed, a sound of profound weariness. "Then you must prepare for what comes. Our elders already whisper that your spirit has been clouded. They say you have brought the scent of the white man into our camp. Now her people come with rifles." He was right. The next morning, Tahu was summoned before the council of elders. He stood in the center of the circle, facing the stern, painted faces of the men who had led his people for generations. "Your heart has led danger to our doorstep, Tahu," one of them said, his voice like cracking stone. "A woman's love is not a shield against a bullet." "A man's love does not fire one either," Tahu countered, his own voice steady, though his insides were churning. But his words were wind. The council had already decided. They would break camp. They would move deeper into the hills, into the Badlands, far from the settlers, far from the ridge, far from her. They were retreating. Tahu had not brought them strength. He had brought them fear. While his people packed their belongings, Clara's world was tearing itself apart. Her father had forbidden her from leaving the house. Matthew and 2 ranch hands, including the cruel-eyed Silas, had ridden out at dawn, their rifles gleaming in the early morning light. "This ain't just about land now," her father had said, his eyes cold and distant. "It's about family honor, something you seem to have forgotten." Clara had screamed, pleaded, argued. It was like throwing pebbles against a stone wall. By late afternoon, she couldn't stand it anymore. He was out there. They were hunting him. And it was her fault. She waited for her father to go to the barn. She stuffed a piece of bread and a canteen of water into a sack, climbed out her bedroom window, and ran for the stables. She saddled her mare with trembling hands and galloped towards the ridge, praying she wasn't too late. She had to see him. She had to know he was safe, even if it was for the last time. She reached their glade, her horse panting, her lungs burning. The clearing was empty, a chilling, heartbreaking emptiness. And then she saw it. Stuck upright in the soft earth, right where they always sat, was his flute. It stood alone, like a tiny, lonely headstone marking a grave. A sob escaped her lips. He was gone. They had moved. She had lost him. She fell to her knees in the dirt, the world dissolving into a blur of tears. "Tahu," she whispered to the empty air. "Please." A twig snapped behind her. She spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. It was him. He stood at the edge of the trees, his face smudged with dirt, his chest heaving as if he'd been running. "Clara," he breathed. "You should not have come." "They moved the camp," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. "You're gone." "It is done," he said, his face a mask of pain. "It is for the best." "No," she said, scrambling to her feet. "It's not. I'll come with you. I'll leave them. I'll leave everything." The agony on his face deepened. "You do not know what you are saying. You cannot live my life." "I don't care," she cried, taking a step towards him. "I only care about you." He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, reaching for her, his name a broken whisper on his lips. "Clara!" Crack. The sound of the rifle shot was like a whip crack, echoing through the trees. It was so loud, so sudden, it seemed to tear the world in 2. Tahu didn't hesitate. He shoved her hard. She stumbled backwards, falling into the soft leaves as another shot rang out, this one thudding into the tree right where her head had been moments before. She looked up, gasping, to see Tahu staring into the woods, his face a terrifying mixture of fury and shock. In the distance, she heard a horse galloping away. Fast. She knew that sound. She knew that rider. It was Matthew. He had followed her. He had seen them. And he had just tried to kill them both. The war wasn't coming anymore. It was already here. Matthew didn't ride back to the ranch. He stormed it. He burst through the cabin door, his rifle still warm in his hand, his eyes burning with a righteous fire. "She was with him," he roared, his voice raw. "In his arms! I saw it!" Their father, who had been pacing the floor, went completely still. His face, already hard, seemed to turn to granite. "Are you certain, son?" "I'd have shot the savage dead if she hadn't been in the way," Matthew spat, slamming the rifle down on the table. He had her bewitched. That night, the Madden Ranch became an armed camp. They didn't just clean their rifles, they sharpened blades, counted bullets, and passed a bottle of whiskey between them, feeding the flames of a war they believed was holy. Clara was no longer a daughter, she was a prisoner. Her father had dragged her back to her room and thrown her inside. "You'll stay in here until we decide what to do with you," he'd said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You are a disgrace to your mother's memory." He slid the heavy iron bolt on the outside of her door. She wasn't locked in for her own protection. She was locked in like an animal. She pounded her fists against the solid wood, screaming until her throat was raw. "You don't know him. He's a good man. You're the savages." No one answered. Miles away, in a temporary camp hidden deep in the Badlands, Tahu held his flute. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so profound it made him feel cold. "They tried to kill her," he said to Wicasa, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Her own brother tried to shoot her." Wicasa's face was grim. "This is their way. They destroy what they cannot understand. They punish what they cannot control." "Then I will take her from them," Tahu declared, his eyes flashing. "Tonight." Wicasa grabbed his arm, his grip like iron. "And do what? Ride into their camp alone? They will kill you before you get within 100 yards. And if they find her with you, they will kill her too. You will bring death to you both." Tahu looked at his brother, his eyes wild with a love that had been pushed past the breaking point. "Then let death find us," he said, "but it will find us together." He waited until the moon was high. He painted his face not with the symbols of war, but with the symbols of shadow and night. He rode out alone, a ghost moving through the darkness, his only weapon the knife at his belt and the desperate plan in his heart. He reached the ranch and crept through the shadows, silent as the fog rolling in from the creek. He found her window. He remembered her description of the rose bush her mother had planted beneath it. He gave a low tap on the glass. A bird call. A sound they had used before. Her face appeared, a pale oval in the darkness. Her eyes were wide, red-rimmed and full of a desperate, frantic hope. "Tahu," she whispered through the glass, her breath fogging the pain. "I can't get out." He barred the door from the outside. "I will break the window," he hissed back. "No, they'll hear you," she said, shaking her head frantically. "Listen. There's an old cellar door around the back, behind the woodpile. It's always unlocked. I can get into the cellar from the kitchen. Meet me there, tomorrow at dusk. It's the only way." He hesitated. Another day felt like an eternity, but she was right. It was too risky now. He nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. Then he melted back into the shadows and was gone. But they weren't as alone as they thought. From the deep darkness of the hayloft in the barn, a figure watched. Matthew. He'd been woken by the mare's nervous whinnying. He'd seen the shadow at his sister's window. He'd crept closer, and he had heard everything. The cellar. Dusk. The next morning, Clara sat at the breakfast table, her face a mask of numb obedience. She pretended she had cried herself to sleep. She pretended she had accepted her punishment. While she played the part of the broken daughter, Matthew slipped out the back. He didn't take one man with him this time. He took Silas and 2 others, and they didn't just carry rifles, they carried ropes. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of blood and orange, Clara made her move. She slipped into the pantry, down the rickety stairs, and out the cellar door. She ran, her heart a wild drum, towards the grove of cottonwoods where they had agreed to meet. She saw him waiting by the creek, a tall, proud silhouette against the fading light. Love and relief surged through her so powerfully it made her dizzy. "Tahu!" she called. He turned, a smile lighting his face, and that's when she heard the click, the unmistakable metallic sound of a rifle hammer being cocked. It wasn't just love that was waiting for her in the woods. It was an ambush, and Tahu had just walked right into the trap her brother had set for him. She heard the gunshot before she saw him fall, a single deafening crack that ripped through the twilight quiet. Then Tahu's body just folded. He crumpled to the ground by the creek like a great bird shot out of the sky. A scream tore from Clara's throat, a raw animal sound of pure horror. She stumbled down the slick embankment, slipping on wet leaves, her hands reaching for him before her brain could even process what she was seeing. Blood. There was so much blood, a dark stain spreading across the deerskin of his shoulder. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, searching for her. "Stay with me," she sobbed, pressing her hands to the wound, feeling the hot, sticky wetness seep through her fingers. "Please, Tahu, don't leave me. Not now." Heavy boots crashed through the underbrush behind her. Matthew stepped into the clearing, his rifle still smoking. Silas and the other two men fanned out behind him, their faces grim and set. "Get away from him, Clara," Matthew snapped, his voice shaking with a terrifying mix of fury and adrenaline. She spun on him, her grief instantly igniting into white-hot rage. "You shot him!" she shrieked. "He wasn't even armed. He was just standing there." "He was reaching for something," one of the other men muttered, looking suddenly uncertain. "He was reaching for me!" she cried, her voice breaking. The men exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. They were supposed to be heroes, defending the honor of a good Christian family. But the girl cradling the bleeding Lakota warrior, her face contorted with love and anguish, didn't look like someone who had been saved. She looked like someone whose entire world had just been murdered in front of her. "You bring shame on this family," Matthew spat, trying to regain control. "Then I want no part of this family," she shot back. She ripped the scarf from her own neck and pressed it hard against Tahu's wound, trying to staunch the bleeding. "He needs a doctor. Now." "He's a savage," Silas grunted. "Let him bleed out." Clara's head snapped up. She fixed Silas with a glare so full of venom that he actually took a step back. "He is a man," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "And if he dies here tonight, his blood is on all of your hands, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure everyone knows it." Something in her voice, in her absolute, unshakable conviction, seemed to pierce through their wall of hatred. Even Matthew looked rattled. Tahu groaned, his body spasming with pain. Clara leaned down, her lips close to his ear. "You stay with me," she whispered fiercely. "You promised. Don't you dare break your promise." For a long moment, nobody moved. It was a tableau of the entire conflict. A girl, a dying warrior, and the men who had shot him, caught between their hate and the undeniable truth of the love they were witnessing. Finally, one of the other ranch hands, a younger man named Eli, cleared his throat. There's an old line cabin about a mile east of here," he stammered. We could get him there. He ain't gonna make it otherwise." Silas scoffed, but Matthew just stared at his sister, at the blood on her hands, and said nothing. He didn't agree, but he didn't stop them either. Grudgingly, Eli and the other man helped Clara lift Tahu. His body was a dead weight, his head lolling against her shoulder. She never let go of his hand, not for a second, whispering to him the whole way, words of love and hope that were a prayer against the encroaching darkness. They stumbled through the woods to the dilapidated cabin. Just as they laid him on the dusty, moth-eaten bunk, the cabin door burst open. It was her father. His face was a thundercloud of pure rage. He took one look at the wounded Lakota on the bed and started forward, his hand reaching for the pistol at his belt. But Clara moved faster. She threw herself in front of him, a human shield between her father and the man she loved. "If you touch him," she said, her voice shaking but unbreakable, "if you lay one hand on him, you will lose me, forever. I swear it on Mama's grave." Her father stopped. He stared at her, really stared, as if seeing her for the first time. He wasn't looking at his little girl anymore. He was looking at a woman who had drawn a line in the sand, a woman who had chosen her side. And in that moment, he realized with a sickening certainty that he had already lost. The fever broke with the dawn. Tahu's eyes fluttered open. He was staring at a ceiling of rough-hewn logs he didn't recognize. The air smelled of dust and pine and something else. Wood smoke. He tried to move, and a bolt of white-hot pain shot through his shoulder. Then he saw her. Clara was asleep in a rickety chair beside the bunk, her head slumped forward, her hair a tangled mess. Her face was pale, with dark smudges of exhaustion under her eyes. But she was there. She hadn't left him. He made a small sound, a dry rasp in his throat, and her head snapped up. Her eyes, filled with sleep and worry, focused on him. "You're awake," she breathed, the words a mix of relief and disbelief. "You're here." He tried to speak, but his throat was like sand. She was there in an instant, lifting a tin cup of water to his lips, her hand gentle as she supported his head. He drank, the cool water a balm to his parched throat. Only when he was finished did she let her own composure crumble. A single tear traced a path through the grime on her cheek, then another. "I thought I lost you," she whispered. "Not yet," he rasped, his voice weak but clear. "Not ever." But the peace inside the tiny cabin was a fragile illusion. Outside, the war was still brewing. Clara's father paced the sagging porch, a caged storm of anger and confusion. The ranch hands who had helped carry Tahu now argued in hushed, anxious tones. Eli argued they'd done the right thing. Silas spat that they had harbored the enemy and that word would get out. Clara stepped outside, blinking in the morning light, just in time to hear Silas's parting shot. "She's going to bring his whole damn tribe down on us. They'll be coming for him. And for revenge." Her father turned on her, his voice bitter. "You hear that? You know what they'll do if they find him here. Blood for blood. That is their way." "Then talk to them," she snapped back, her exhaustion giving way to a fresh wave of defiance. "Tell them we don't want a war. Tell them it was a mistake." "It's too late for talking," he grumbled. "It's only too late if you decide it is," she insisted. As if summoned by her words, a figure appeared on the crest of the nearby hill, a lone rider, moving slow and deliberate, unarmed. Clara's heart leaped. She recognized the strong set of his shoulders, the way he sat his horse. "It's his brother," she said, her voice hushed. "Wicasa, he's come." Silas and the others instinctively reached for their rifles. "Stand down," her father barked, his voice carrying an authority that surprised them all. "Let him come." Wicasa dismounted, his movements calm and measured, his eyes scanning the scene with an unnerving intensity. He stopped before the porch. "I have come for my brother," he said, his voice even. "Not to fight, only to see that he lives." Clara led him inside. The two brothers looked at each other, a lifetime of understanding passing between them in a single glance. Tahu managed a faint, wry smile. "You always did say I would end up in a strange place." "Half dead in a settler's bed was not what I pictured," Wicasa replied dryly, but his eyes were soft with relief. He turned his gaze to Clara. It was heavy, assessing. "You saved him. You could have run. You could have let him die. Your own people would have praised you for it." "But I would have hated myself," she said simply. "I love him. That truth doesn't care about the name of his people or the color of his skin." Wicasa held her gaze for a long, silent moment. He seemed to be looking right through her, into the very heart of her. Then, He gave a single, slow nod, a gesture of respect, of acceptance. Then you should know his name in our tongue, he said quietly. It is Tahutanka. It means great heart. She repeated it, the syllables feeling sacred on her tongue. Tahutanka. The name settled in the quiet room. For the first time, someone from her world had spoken his true name, not as a curse, not as a label for an enemy, but as a truth. And that single, fragile truth was about to be tested by fire. The signal came as a thin column of smoke, rising from the east ridge, a dark finger pointing an accusation at the sky. Clara saw it from the porch, and her blood went cold. Wicasa, who had stepped outside, narrowed his eyes. A signal fire, he muttered. Your people are gathering. Her father came out of the cabin, his rifle in his hand again. He looked from the smoke to Clara, his face grim. You see what you've brought to my door? You harbored him, and now they're coming for all of us. They're coming because of hate, not because of him, she retorted. He has done nothing but show me kindness. And that's exactly what they're afraid of, he roared back. The news spread through the valley like a brush fire. A wounded Lakota warrior was being hidden at the Madden place. The girl had chosen him over her own blood. It wasn't about land anymore. It was about betrayal. By dusk, a posse of armed men had gathered at the crossroads, their faces lit by the flickering orange of torches. Inside the cabin, Tahutanka was sitting up on the edge of the bunk. He was pale, his shoulder bandaged with strips of Clara's own petticoat, but his eyes were clear and resolute. They will come tonight, he said, his voice low. Men like that, full of drink and righteousness, they won't wait for the sun. Wicasa nodded grimly. And if our scouts see their torches, our own warriors will come as well, not to talk, to fight. We have to get you out of here, Clara said, her mind racing. All of us. We can run. And go where? Her father snapped, stepping back inside. We'd never outrun them, not with him wounded, not in the dark. There's nowhere to go. Then we make our stand here, she said, looking from her father to Wicasa, to the man she loved. Her fear was gone, burned away by a strange, terrifying clarity. We stand together, or we fall together. Just as the last sliver of sun vanished behind the jagged hills, they appeared. A line of riders on the ridge, their dark shapes silhouetted against the violet sky. At the front, holding a burning torch high, was her brother, Matthew. Behind him, Silas and a dozen other men, their faces hard and merciless in the firelight. Wicasa stepped out onto the porch, his hands raised, palms open, to show he was unarmed. No one needs to die here tonight, he shouted, his powerful voice carrying across the clearing. We seek only peace. Peace? Matthew's voice, twisted with rage, echoed back. Peace died the day he put his hands on my sister. No, Matthew, Clara screamed, stepping out to stand beside Wicasa, her slight frame a stark contrast to his warrior's build. That's the day something good and honest finally began in my life. Her voice, clear and ringing with passion, seemed to stun the riders into a moment of silence. If you burn this cabin, she cried out, her eyes finding her brothers in the darkness, you are not defending your land or your honor. You are burying your own souls in ash. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Silas spurred his horse forward, another lit torch in his hand. Enough talk, he snarled. Burn it! Burn them all! He raised his arm to throw the torch onto the cabin's dry roof. But then, something impossible happened. Clara's father stepped off the porch. He raised his own rifle, the one he'd been holding all day. But he didn't aim it at Wicasa or Tahutanka. He aimed it squarely at his own son. You let him throw that torch, Matthew, he said, his voice cracking with a pain deeper than anger. And I swear on your mother's soul, you will never call me father again. You will be as dead to me as she is. Matthew froze, His face was a battlefield of confusion, hatred, and a lifetime of tangled loyalties. He looked from his father's rifle to his sister's pleading face, to the torch in Silas's hand. He saw the abyss opening up in front of them all, and he made a choice. He lunged sideways, knocking the torch from Silas's hand. It fell to the dirt, sputtering, its flame quickly swallowed by the darkness. Silence. A thick, trembling, absolute silence. The fire was out. No one cheered, no one celebrated. The riders just sat on their horses, staring, the bloodlust draining from them, replaced by a cold, dawning shame. They hadn't come to fight warriors. They had come to burn a wounded man, a girl, and her father alive in a cabin. And they had almost done it. Her father was the first to lower his rifle. "Enough," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of it all. "This madness ends tonight." He looked over at Clara, his eyes filled with a reluctant, painful understanding. This girl, she's made her choice, and maybe for once, it ain't the wrong one. Tahutanka, leaning on Wicasa for support, took a shaky step forward onto the porch. He looked out at the silent crowd of men who had come to kill him. "We never asked for this war," he said, his voice weak but carrying in the stillness. "We never asked for anything from you, only the right to live, the right to care for one another." No one answered, but no one raised a weapon either. And in a land that had been watered with bad blood for generations, that silence was a victory. Wicasa stepped forward. "I will take my brother back to our camp. He can heal there with his own people." Clara looked at her father, her heart in her throat. "I'm going with him." "You do that, and you'll be an outcast," he warned, his voice rough with emotion. "Marked by both our people and his." "Then let them mark me," she said softly. "At least I'll be marked for love, not for hate." Her father stared at her for a long moment. Then he reached into his worn coat and pulled out something small and silver. The locket. Her mother's locket. He pressed it into her hand. "Your ma would have understood," he murmured, his voice thick. "She never did have much use for lines drawn in the dirt." He turned and walked back into the dark cabin without another word. Wicasa helped Tahutanka onto his horse, and Clara climbed up behind him, her arms wrapping securely around his waist. She leaned her cheek against his back, feeling the unsteady beat of his heart. Together, flanked by Wicasa, they rode away from the cabin, watched by the silent crowd of men who didn't know whether to be angry or ashamed. Matthew didn't watch them go. He just stood by his horse, staring at the smoldering patch of dirt where the torch had fallen, a solitary figure lost in the ruins of his own hatred. As they reached the edge of the valley, Tahutanka reached back, his hand finding hers. "Are you still sure, Clara?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She tightened her grip, resting her head on his shoulder. Ahead of them, a new campfire glowed in the distance, a beacon in the vast darkness. Behind them, a home still stood, a testament to a fire that had been stopped. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she said. In the space where bullets could have flown and blood could have been spilled, something else had risen instead. It was fragile, it was uncertain, but it was a beginning, and as they rode toward the Lakota fire, under a vast, silent sky full of stars, they carried that beginning with them. Years passed. The story of that night on the ridge became a legend, a cautionary tale whispered by settlers and Lakota alike. The night the Madden girl chose a warrior. The night her father chose his daughter over his pride. The night her brother chose peace over fire. Clara and Tahutanka didn't ask for acceptance. They built it. On a small patch of land nestled in the valley between the ridge and the river, a place that belonged to no one and everyone, they built a home. They planted corn and squash, raised horses that were a mix of her father's sturdy stock and the Lakota's swift ponies. They built a life not on the edge of two worlds, but in the heart of a new one. When their first child was born, a boy with his father's dark eyes and his mother's fiery hair, they named him Waka, the Lakota word for sacred, for hope. At first, they were ghosts, shunned by the town, regarded with suspicion by the tribe. But time, like a slow river, wears down even the hardest stone. A settler's wife, whose own daughter had run off with a hired hand, came to Clara for advice. A young Lakota brave, who had fallen for a girl from another tribe, came to Tahutanka for guidance. They came, one by one, not to judge, but to understand. Clara and Tahutanka didn't offer sermons. They offered their truth, the simple, powerful truth of a life lived for love. One spring afternoon, a lone rider appeared at their fence line. He was older now, his face weathered, the fire in his eyes banked to a low, reflective ember. It was Matthew. Clara saw him from the porch of their small, sturdy cabin. She walked out slowly to meet him, her heart beating a steady, cautious rhythm. "You came," she said. "Took me long enough," he replied, his voice raspy. He took off his hat, turning it over and over in his hands. His eyes fell on little Waka, who was trying to braid the mane of a patient old mare. Is he yours?" "He's ours," Clara said, a gentle pride in her voice. She nodded toward the field, where Tahutanka and Wikasa were breaking a new colt. "And that's his uncle, teaching him how to be a horseman." Matthew watched them for a long time. "He's got your spirit," he said quietly. "And his father's heart," Clara added softly. A long, heavy silence stretched between them. "I hated you, Clara," Matthew finally admitted, his eyes on the ground. "For years. I hated you because I was afraid, and I didn't understand. I've been alone for a long time since Pa died, and I learned something. Hate is a cold fire. It keeps you warm for a minute, but it burns your house down in the end." Clara reached out and placed a hand on his arm. His shoulders, which had always been so tense and rigid, seemed to slump in relief. "You don't have to carry it anymore, Matthew," she said. His eyes were wet when he looked up. I came to meet my nephew," he said, his voice thick. "If that's all right." "It always was," she said, her own tears starting to fall. That evening, they all sat around the same fire. A settler, 2 warriors, a woman who belonged to both and neither, and a small boy who was the future. No one spoke of the ambush or the torches or the guns. They didn't have to. The story lived in the quiet spaces between them, in the way Tahutanka reached for Clara's hand, in the sound of Waka's fearless laughter, in the way Matthew accepted a piece of roasted corn from his nephew. They hadn't ended the war between 2 peoples. But here, in this small circle of light, they had created something more powerful. They had built a family. They had forged a peace. A legacy of love that no bullet, no border, and no hatred could ever tear apart. If you were moved by this story of courage and a love that defied all boundaries, please show your support by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. Let us know in the comments below, what's the biggest barrier you've ever seen love overcome? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.